Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Alone in the Dark 2024 on PS5. Despite the fact that we would not have survival horror as we know it without it, Alone in the Dark as a franchise has often been left behind by the games that came after it. Not really because those games innovated as much as modern players would like to believe, for the Alone in the Dark DNA is still strong within the code of every Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dead Space, and Amnesia game in existence and their derivatives. But because, I believe, the developers really couldn't keep a consistent tone and often took wild tangents or tried to keep up with the games they spawned, no matter how badly those other franchises went off on their own way. Will this new attempt to remake the original 1992 classic help to get the franchise back on its footing? Let's discuss that with 2024's Alone in the Dark. As I said, the original game released way the fuck back in 1992, which is at this point longer than some of you listening have been alive. And I will try not to hold that against you. And as I have said previously, other than Sweet Home, this is the game that started everything you love or hate about survival horror. Fixed camera angles, limited ammo, weird puzzles and goofy death traps, the reason everyone in horror games writes a tell-all journal right up to the time they are halfway down the gullet of the beast hunting them? That's all Alone in the Dark, baby. And more. But the tone has never been consistent. The 1992 title starred dual protagonists that you could choose to play as, the original Edward Carnby and Emily Hartwood. Sound familiar to something else? Even through the rough polygons, it had an oppressive atmosphere that devolved into platforming and bonkers plot within a mansion, going way off the rails. Sound fucking familiar? And it was, for its time, scary. But the sequels were a ghost pirate point and click adventure, then zombie ghost hunting in an Old West movie set that quickly gave way to silly puzzles and gameplay more reminiscent of something like Out of This World than a horror game. It would lay dormant until 2001 with Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, which I personally loved, but we'll talk about that Game Boy port at a later date. Oof. But it also kind of got tossed in the dustbin of history as being too much of a Resident Evil clone, which is a line of thinking that still shocks me in its ignorance. There were two games that came after it that were absolute trash fires, and it went dead again. Yet here comes Pieces Interactive and THQ Nordic to try and raise it up again in the never-ending nightmare year of our God King 2024. This time we return to the Derceto Mansion, the original one, set against the backdrop of the late 1920s, much like the original, where Private Detective Edward Carnby and Governess Emily Hartwood are going to check on the fate of Emily's uncle Jeremy Hartwood, as Derceto is now a rest home for the mentally fatigued, a gentle term for an insane asylum, deep in the heart of the Louisiana Bayou. Both characters are motion captured and voiced by real actors. Carnby is played by David Harbour, who was in Stranger Things and a Hellboy movie nobody liked for some fucking reason, because I never saw it and probably never will because I couldn't give a shit less about movies anymore, but I'm sure Mr. Harbour is doing other things now. And Emily is played by Jodie Comer, who was in something, maybe. Seriously, who is she? Don't bother answering, I don't care. But good on her for making far more money than I ever will for playing pretend professionally. So they are really trying to bring Alone in the Dark up to date with more recent survival horror games that like to use motion capture and model good looks on their heroes and razor-fisted 9-foot tall giant titty queens alike. Anyway, whoever you choose to play as, the story will mostly follow the exact same path, except for a few critical areas in interaction which I'll mention later. Either Carnby or Emily will break into the mansion as no one is answering the door, find a flashlight and bullets right away for the guns they brought along, in this case a revolver for Carnby and some sort of lady's self-defense pistol for Emily. And the mansion itself already sets the mood for rundown and creepy and housing the mentally ill in the early part of the 20th century. When whoever you choose lets the other character into the mansion, we finally meet the rest of the cast for this adventure. An on staff psychologist, Dr. Gray, the creepy governess who practices voodoo, as do many people in the supporting cast, the nurse and her brother, the orderly who is a mountain of a man, and the patients. An alcoholic, a creepy little girl dropped off because mommy couldn't be bothered to care for her, the sexually deviant daughter of a New Orleans high society family, meaning she is either bisexual or a lesbian, but that was enough to be placed in an asylum in the 1920s. A drug addicted writer we never meet but who has an influence on the patients. And lastly, Jeremy Hartwood himself, a mentally ill artist who has made some sort of pact with a figure known as the Dark Man, and who is the same sort of nervous wreck staple of eldritch horror right out of the pages of Lovecraft himself. And speaking of that, holy hot shit. If you are a Cthulhu Mythos fan, there are references to the extended Mythos lore layered thickly over this game, to the point where you quite honestly might miss a lot of them without some sort of compendium. Seriously, this game out Cthulhu's every other game released in the last decade, with that name or license attached to it directly or indirectly, even some of the ones I previously covered on this show. I'm going to recommend something to you, dear listeners. I'm going to make several references to Mythos monsters I know, but you may not, but taking time to explain them in depth is way beyond the scope of this recording. So I highly recommend you either pick up a copy of the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu role-playing game book from Chaosium Games, even if you'll never play it, or just Google any of the names I say on this show, and there will be a wiki entry to explain them. It's kinda critical that you do. Anyway, as the heroes begin to explore the mansion looking for Jeremy, whoever you pick will become separated from the other and begin to fall into waking hallucinations that Jeremy's tired mind has left imprinted on the very fabric of time and reality of Derceto. From the foggy and monster-haunted streets of New Orleans, to an oil rig camp outside a place called the Hateful Mound, where cultists went to worship things from beyond the stars, to an ancient Egyptian temple, to the library/religious retreat outside of time known as Tarawea, to the cemeteries of New Orleans, and to an epic battle in the Arctic Circle beneath the northern lights. All of these locations are linked to Jeremy's fractured psyche and his pact with this dark man, who he brokered his soul with to save all of humanity, despite his warnings that the staff and patients of Derceto are all in cahoots to summon a great evil into the world from which nothing will survive. But the staff and patients aren't the only players here. The Dark Man is the most prominent of our foes, although you will never fight him directly, as he appears in his towering form with flowing purple robes and golden half mask, as he is unkillable. And another creature, known only as the Goat with 1,000 Young, who are pulling the strings both directly and indirectly at Derceto and with Jeremy. Whoever you are playing will confront the Dark Man a few times, mostly to escape, and will hear about the other named entity as the goal of the cultists. And although you will run into the player you did not pick throughout the story, that character will not be having the experiences you are. So as I said, it almost doesn't matter who you play as. But you will learn more about how these two entities tie into what is going on here. The Dark Man is one of the many, many names of the outer god and herald of the destroyer Hastur, known by its real name of Nyarlathotep, so named when he first appeared to the Egyptians centuries ago. Nyarlathotep has been at the center of every religion humans have ever conceived of. Amun-Ra, Odin, Zeus, Jesus of Nazareth, he's played them all. And if you have ever worshipped or prayed to a god or devil, you've really been praying to him. The Goat with 1,000 Young is another name for the twisted fertility goddess Shub-Niggurath, one of the great old ones, and one of the few female mythos monsters. A writhing mass of tentacles, mouths, teats, hooves, and nebulous black mass that has mated and produced offspring with a number of the other famous mythos monsters, and whom could easily destroy humanity by herself without the boys jumping in to help. Seriously, wiki this shit. It helps. But at the center of this horror show are the two players pulling against each other to enter through Derceto because there are rules to this shit, and they can't just show up, but need to be invited into our reality by willing humans. The characters will explore and investigate every corner of the mansion, interacting with the strange patients and surly staff, run down every one of Jeremy's nightmares, and discover strange occult items called laganapes, if I even pronounced that right, that will unlock more lore, or the bad ending for the characters. Oh, by the way, this game has 5 possible endings, so good luck. Armaments will also be limited to the pistol, shotgun, Thompson submachine gun, a late game flare gun, and whatever melee weapon you can pick up, such as shovels and sledgehammers, that break after a few uses slamming them against monster skulls. You don't have to worry about managing inventory, as there isn't much the characters don't keep on them. But ammo is limited, and the characters can only carry so much, so if you miss ammo pickups because you are full, too fucking bad. Healing is also done by picking up hip flasks of whiskey to slug down when you get hurt, so it's pretty simple. And by the end, the real difference in the game, both characters will confront their greatest traumas that the Dark Man is trying to use against them, so spoilers ahead. Carnby hit rock bottom some years ago with alcohol and gambling debts, and took a bad case that got to him, in which he had to track down who he thought was a deadbeat father, the father of the little girl patient in Derceto, who supposedly kidnapped her and stole some valuable art. He tracked the dad and the kid down to a bridge outside New Orleans and ran their car off the road. He saved the child, but let the father drown, despite having plenty of time to save him as well, thinking he was delivering justice, only to find out the mother was a fucking piece of shit and an abuser who immediately dumped the kid off at Derceto, collected the check, and fucked off to Europe to live her life. Emily will instead get to confront the fact that her fiancé did not die in the trenches of France during World War I, but instead died of the Spanish flu outbreak in New Orleans long before he could go, and wasted away at Derceto Mansion when it had been opened up as an emergency sanitarium to deal with all the dead and dying piling up in the city. She was so disgusted by the disease ravaging her soon-to-be husband and how weak he was becoming that she couldn't stand to look at him anymore and stopped visiting him, making up a lie to herself and others that her strong, vital man died fighting injustice rather than the truth of a man struck down by a killer illness none could have predicted, and stopped that ravaged him with prolonged suffering, which is much like the big twist of the character of James from Silent Hill 2, which, when I realized this, made me lose a ton of respect for this version of Emily Hartwood. Look, human response be damned. My wife and I just went through 2 withering, prolonged family illnesses that both led to death in the last few months, and we withstood and stepped up. So fuck you if you run when the shit hits the fan, the chips are down, and fuck you if you make excuses to cover for those who do. Anyway, that's really the big change in the game story between the characters. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. Now, after a harrowing, bizarre trip through one last nightmare that leads to the Arctic Circle and a fight against an undead explorer that you need to read the notes carefully to understand why that happened, the main character will accidentally lobotomize Jeremy Hartwood, which will break his pact with the Dark Man, and they will wake up just in time for the staff and patients of Derceto to try and call forth Shub-Niggurath at the base of an old and twisted tree that has been on the mansion's garden all game long, and which you have passed several times in traversing the mansion by praying some sort of ritual spell to her and lynching the little girl, who was willing to be sacrificed, mind you, and has been a terrible brat all throughout the game, no matter who you've played as. But breaking this fucks up the ritual to call forth the Great Old One and instead unleashes one of her spawn called a Dark Young that takes the form of the very tree everyone has been praying around, transforming it, or rather awakening it to its true form, of a mass of teeth and tentacles and elephantine legs as it devours staff and patients alike and rampages through the now burning mansion. And either Carnby or Emily will have to stop it once and for all by shooting the cancerous caviar-like growths it spawns in a very small arena against something the size of a school bus that is flailing around and vomiting up monsters that also need killing. Thankfully, the final air arena is full of ammunition, so blast away. Of course, if you don't shoot the bubbling weak spots, you can waste all the ammo like I did and get killed by an otherwise unstoppable final boss monster, which is actually correct in the outcome, considering how powerful these hellish spawns are in the fiction and the tabletop game. But it wouldn't be any fun if you just died instead of blowing it up real good. In the endings I got, both Carnby and Emily leave Derceto, being traded by lobotomized Jeremy and the little girl, bound for New Orleans and then parts unknown. And there the game ends, or at least ended for me. Seriously, Google Dark Young. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's not a rapper, I promise. Well, that was a lot in one go. Alright, so the critics were not kind to this game. Alone in the Dark 2024 got mixed to average reviews and sits at about 66 on Metacritic, which in the year of our multiple national embarrassments 2024 is pretty much like euthanizing a litter of inconvenient puppies. Yes, it was technically a humane death, but you're still a vicious fucking bastard for having done it. Not many people could get behind this remake, and can you all guess what happened next? Damn, you guys are good at this guessing game. That's right. Alone in the Dark 2024 fell far below sales figures projected by THQ Nordic, and their parent group, Embracer, shut down Pieces Interactive in June of 2024, 3 months after the game's debut. So yeah, we ain't getting another Alone in the Dark game for a long, long time, if ever again. Seems somebody was taking notes from EA. Some of you, I'm sure, will give a good old clown fart in honor of this franchise having yet another disastrous title in its history and see it off to a watery grave. But that, in all truth, is where you would be wrong. Look, I'm happy to champion underdogs against a popular bully, and Alone in the Dark is certainly an underdog of a franchise. I'm not going to gloss over the many fuck ups by developers and studios it has had over the years, from Atari being Atari to Infogrames not being able to pull their heads out of their asses, to getting in bed with THQ, who have revealed that they are not the heroes of the game industry many thought and hoped for. But I can say with all honesty, this game got very mistreated now that I've played through it. Were there bugs or glitches? A few, but nothing game breaking or affecting the overall experience. In fact, I encountered only two in a 6 to 7 hour game. Was the story bad? No, not at all. A little boilerplate, but it did fit the time period and setting. How was the acting? Fuck if I know. It wasn't The Room levels of bad, but if I wasn't sitting there the entire game doing my best Mystery Science Theater 3000 impression all the way through the game and its scenes, then it did pretty fucking good in my book. If you feel you can accurately critique acting, then go ahead and start sniffing around the panties of the Chicago Sun-Tribune entertainment section to see if they'll hire you. I'm sure they've been floundering ever since Roger Ebert died. Otherwise, I had very little bad to say about this game. I really enjoyed my time with Alone in the Dark 2024, and it sits there right there next to Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare and the original game as the best in its series. I would add so far, but I'm pretty sure we know this is it for the franchise. Yes, it does look like every other third-person over-the-shoulder camera gun battle versus monsters game that has come out since 2005 when, and fucking Christ, I have to say this yet again, Resident Evil 4 debuted and changed the game for going on 2 decades now. Although in a very late stage, they do a cheeky nod to the original game's fixed camera angles when the characters have to investigate Dr. Gray's office just before the last battle, which is kind of cute in a nostalgic way. But I'm sure some gaping asshole out there will complain it wasn't done the way they had imagined all in their precious little noggins and land somewhere between bitching old out of touch grognards and pretentious hipster douche canoes on the list of people that should be phased out of existence by being stripped naked and fed ass cheeks first into an industrial paper shredder. And believe me, that is an already long list. So, as usual, nobody here wins. I wish I could say that there was something hopeful or a silver lining here about this seminal survival horror franchise in general, or this game in particular. But much like the content of the game, it's pretty bleak. A lot of games in recent memory have hired known faces and voices in the acting game to help upsell their products. I'm sure hoping Hollywood could smear its fecal glitz all over the project like a band-aid over a spurting wound. But as usual, it didn't help when the developers were under the gun and the publishers were looking for quick returns. And yes, I'm sure the critics of this rich man's hobby industry, and I'm saying really folks, we're about 2 steps removed from Golf Digest here with our bullshit. I'm sure the heads of Kotaku and the like will start requiring pink polos and khakis around the office any day now. The critics didn't help, even though I'm sure that they believed that they were being very truthful. But in the end, it cost people their livelihoods, and the men who dole out the coin of the realm didn't suffer. And yes, I know every game, to quote an associate, is somebody's favorite game. I'm proof enough of that. Yet I remain disappointed. Not at the game, I enjoyed the shit out of it. Just at the state of where we are now as a community, or game fans and enjoyers. And I'm also sure some smirking jizz tube out there will be all, but this is the greatest time in games. Look at all the games every room temperature IQ out there can put together. And honestly, I'm just tired, gang. I'm just tired. I cannot, and I stress this, cannot say go fuck yourself loud enough with both middle fingers extended as far as they can go. No indie darling or guaranteed smash remake hit can cover the hemorrhaging, the wasted money, the mismanagement, and the bad behavior that has been allowed to go on for too long. Should you get a copy of Alone in the Dark 2024? Sure, I'll say it's a decent pickup. If you enjoyed any of the other recent Resident Evil remakes, or the Dead Space remake, or the I'm sure I'm forgetting something else remake, or upscale re release, go ahead and grab this one if you need something to cover the hole left in your schedule until the next blockbuster comes out. I'm pretty much on it's on permanent sale anyway. Might as well play it now until the shit can the server and it's housed on and you can't download it anymore in our all digital age. Just be prepared to do a little deep diving on the lore to get the full experience. And if that's too much work for you, then just enjoy the visuals and simple user interface and voice acting over every single piece of in-game text. It's really very good. But for now, I guess this is it for the Alone in the Dark franchise. Unless someone decides to sell the rights again and take another shot at it when something else becomes super popular and an industry standard. It's a sad fate for a genre-defining game series to always play catch-up with its competitors, but not every nightmare amounts to something. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mas Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.